So here we are. This is it. We are at the center of the dialogue now. What comes next is the most important thing for us. For this class, a class called Knowledge and Existence, a class that is in what we might call first philosophy, getting to the very, very basic questions about reality and our relation to reality as conscious, knowing subjects. It may sound a little bit pompous, but we're doing big issues here. Okay, so we are at the very center of the dialogue, and what comes next is the most important thing to note. And okay, we're reading a dialogue, and it's not so easy to read a Platonic dialogue. It takes a lot of effort, but it takes even more effort than we might first imagine, because it's not enough to read it. It's not enough to read the dialogue. You also have to think about the dialogue. I'm not making any claim to understand this dialogue, I encourage you to go to other sources, people smarter, more scholarly, more learned, more insightful than me, to get interpretations of this dialogue. But if you're going to get anything out of this personally, you're going to have to think about it. Think about the questions that are raised. Think about the moves that Plato, Socrates makes during the course of this conversation. You have to think about it. So let's think about where we are here. Socrates has asked Meno to tell him what virtue is, and he has said, "I don't know what it is." And Meno said, "Well, how could you not know what it is? Virtue is, obviously it's this in a man, it's this in a woman, it's this in a child. It's not good. Okay." And when Socrates says that he's ignorant about virtue, he couldn't mean that he would be unable to do the same thing. That is, to point out examples of what seemingly is virtue. Of course Socrates could do that. But he says that he knows nothing about virtue. So what's the conclusion? That the ability to seemingly identify examples of virtue is no evidence at all that you know what virtue is. Well, how could that be? Well, think about it. You're asked what something is, and you respond by pointing out examples of it. And it may be that those are correct identifications, that you've correctly identified examples of a certain thing. But just the ability to point out examples proves nothing in terms of whether you really know on what basis you're identifying those examples in the first place. That is, you have done it, or you've done something. You've pointed to things that seemingly are related, seemingly are true examples of what you're looking for. However, you have no idea on what basis you've done it. You've just done something, but you don't know if any of your examples are correct, really, because you don't know on what basis you've pointed these things out and pointed to these things as opposed to other things as examples of that kind. So what Socrates is driving at with Meno and trying to get him to understand, seemingly, is that he's got to do some self-reflection here. And he's got to ask himself, well, I think this is virtue, and that is virtue, and that is virtue, but why? On what basis do I believe that these things are virtues? And does that basis make sense? That's what Socrates does. So, by knocking down these attempts at defining virtue on Meno's part, what has Socrates done? He's attempted to get Meno to recognize what he himself has recognized about himself long ago, and that is that he's unable to give a real answer about what he really knows, what he seems to know. We seem to know what these things are, but when we ask ourselves how we know, or on what basis we know, we are unable to answer. And that is that we are ignorant, seemingly, at least insofar as we are not able to articulate a rational account of the basis upon which we are able to make these sort of identifications that we do make in everyday life. So, yeah, I guess, if we follow along with Socrates' reasoning, we know nothing about these things. That is, we are as ignorant as Socrates when it comes to matters like this. So, what do we do then? Well, Socrates isn't dismayed by his own ignorance. And he's not dismayed by other people recognizing their own ignorance either. He is encouraged by it. From the very beginning of the Platonic dialogues, if we go back to the Apology, which is Socrates' defense speech, when he's accused of corrupting a youth of Athens, and that's always the backstory of the dialogues, isn't it? The trial and death of Socrates. He says, if there's one thing that makes me wiser than other men, it is that I know that I know nothing, whereas others know nothing but think that they know something. He saw himself as he put it in the Apology, the gadfly, the fly that stings the great beast of Athens, stings it to awaken it from its slumber, to wake it up and get it to realize all the things that it has been ignoring. Most prominently, that it doesn't know what it's talking about most of the time. So for Socrates, this process of recognizing one's own ignorance is a good process. It's a healthy process. Why? Because it dispels our illusions that we have about who we are and what we think we know. And it clears the boards. It sobers us up about the deficits that we have as knowing beings. And hopefully it then encourages us to do something about that ignorance, do something about those deficits. Well, come to think of it, I don't know what virtue is. I thought I did before I talked to you. Socrates is described by Meno as the torpedo fish, or the stinging electric eel or something. That he perplexes and beguiles and bewitches him. There's some flirting going on here, is there not? At page 12, around margin number 80. I am quite perplexed. I feel numb. I have no answer to give you. And Socrates is like, okay, yeah, right, you're flirting with me, right? You're trying to butter me up here. But he's interested in business, right? It's a philosophical business. And he says to Meno, now if the torpedo fish is itself numb, and so makes others numb, then I resemble it, but not otherwise. For I myself do not have the answer when I perplex others, but I am more perplexed than anyone when I cause perplexity in others. So now I do not know what virtue is. Perhaps you knew before you contacted me, but now you are certainly like one who does not know. Nevertheless, I want to examine and seek together with you what it may be. So Socrates telling Meno, okay, now we know, we have a better sense of where we are in relation to virtue, and we have a better sense of how much we know about virtue, which is nothing. So now that we have realized that, which is actually a great step, and Socrates again, this is my gift to you, he says to the Athenians, to show you that you are like me, that you know nothing about these very important matters, like what virtue is, how to live, stuff like that. Let's together try to become better and find out what these things are. Now that we know that we are completely ignorant about them, let's try to get knowledge about them. So here it is. How does Meno reply to that? Does he say, okay, Socrates, let's give it a shot. What is virtue? No, he does not say that. This is on page 13 at 80D, just below D. Meno says, how will you look for it, Socrates, when you do not know at all what it is? How will you aim to search for something you do not know at all? If you should meet with it, how will you know that this is the thing you did not know? Well, that's it. Frankly, that's why we're reading this dialogue. It's that question that Meno asks that makes this the dialogue, I think, to start with when we're in a class called Knowledge and Existence, and thinking about metaphysics and thinking about reality and thinking about how we could ever come to know reality. Meno asks Socrates, okay, you are ignorant about what virtue is. You don't know it at all. I now realize that I don't know it at all. How are we ever going to find it if we know nothing about it? It's Socrates' response to that that constitutes the heart of this dialogue.